Welcome to the Prospective Doctor Podcast, where we will provide essential information for pre-medical students and those already in medical school. Listen each week for tips on how to improve your application and gain an acceptance to medical school.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today. My name is Dr. Renee Marinelli, and I'm the Director of Advising with Med School Coach. Today, I have on the line one of our newest advisors, Dr. Ben Robison. Welcome to our podcast. How are you?
Oh, good. Hi, Renee. It's nice to be here.
Yeah, well, thanks for joining us today. Dr. Robison joins us kind of as a non-traditional path to medicine. He got his PhD in music and did a lot of other things before applying to medical school, and then received his MD degree from Stanford. I will go ahead and send it over to you, Dr. Robison. Can you tell us a little bit about your path to medicine and how you came to be here?
Absolutely. So most definitely, I would be what you would consider a non-traditional student. I, as you mentioned, started off as a musician, played the violin since I was a very young age, probably my first lesson when I was 3 years old, and took it very seriously. I went to conservatory, played concerts, kept developing my skill in that area. But as I moved forward in music, I think a constant quality I had was just curiosity. So I continued to explore the relationship between music and sound and other senses. So I ended up doing multimedia stage work. And as that developed, a parallel theme for me emerged, which was what started off as a sort of activism. So I started being involved in sort of political activities, trying to work on peace efforts, these sort of things. And what was interesting about that is that in itself, I was using music to sort of support these activities, but my own particular inclination tended to be more concrete. And it just didn't seem to be enough for me to go out there and protest. What I really wanted to do was to have some sort of meaningful impact on other people's lives.
Yeah.
And so even within our work in activism, and I ended up during the PhD you mentioned, I started an organization called the Musicians Alliance for Peace. And we ended up focusing more on how we could use music to bring to light different aspects of peace within local communities. So and what that meant, very practically speaking, was in one community, it meant they needed a cistern for their new hospital. In one community, it meant that they needed to raise money for a local music program. For one community, it meant they wanted to be able to put children on the radio to tell their stories. And that really affected me. And I realized how much I love the idea of a very hands-on, very direct approach to helping. And I think around that time, I had finished on my PhD. I was working as a professional musician in New York City. I had a couple of my peers from my conservatory years, as happens in New York, surprising with a city of somewhere on the order of 10 million people, you tend to just bump into people that you know, and it's always a surprise. But when I did so, I literally on the street bumped into a cellist that was a close friend from my conservatory years, asked her what she was up to, and she's like, "Oh, I'm now going to medical school."
Oh, wow.
And it was something that I hadn't considered seriously up until that point. But I think it planted a seed. And as I was thinking about this idea of like being able to help in a very concrete fashion, having this ongoing curiosity for how things work and how the senses engage within music, I think that was the first step towards me considering the idea of medicine. And I think over the course of a year at that point, I started thinking about it much more seriously and realized that both the immense richness and complexity of the medical field, the incredibly intelligent people that tend to be involved in it, and that sort of concrete, direct line towards making a difference in somebody's life really connected with me. So at that point, I started to investigate much more seriously what it would mean for me to actually take on that path. Because I think at the time I was like, this is completely insane. I'm a professional musician. What am I doing thinking about this? And so there were a lot of sort of concrete steps in order to dig into that and try to understand what it meant for me to even think about this transition.
Sure. That's an amazing story and definitely a big transition and big decision you had to make. How did you go about getting the kind of clinical experience and required experiences that most medical school admissions committees would like you to have before applying?
So I didn't at that time. When I started college, I had actually taken some physics courses along with my music and arts courses with the thought that I might be a physics major, and then quickly just focused on music. Those courses were old enough that I was going to have to start over again. But prior to even considering that coursework, I really wanted to know if this was real, because I think there's a huge gap between the idea of something, particularly in medicine, and the reality of the sort of day-by-day practice. And it was something that I realized that I was only going to get a simulation, but I wanted to be as close to it as I could. So my first step personally was to train as an EMT. So I was living in Long Island City, which is just across the river from Manhattan at the time. And the local community college there had a EMT program. So I just signed up, was able to walk from my apartment to the classes. And over the course of 3 months, garnered that, and then volunteered as an EMT for several months after that, and realized and this is the level at which I was sort of thinking about these things. I'm like, I don't know if I'm going to pass out every time I see blood. Let me just make sure that these very basic things work. And so I found out I was fine with that. I got a chance this particular volunteer service also provided EMT for the Mets baseball field out in Flushing. So worked there, saw a lot of patients, got just some basic hands-on, what is it like to care for someone in the U.S. healthcare system, and quickly realized that I liked it, but also still wanted a richer scientific experience. So I think there's incredible validity to thinking about, maybe I should be a nurse or maybe I should be a physician assistant. But I think part of me just wanted to have a much deeper dive and be able to engage with patients at the level that you only get to if you go through an entire medical training. So at that point, once I started into the EMT training, started to think this way. In New York City, there's a post-bac program at Columbia University. So I applied to that and used that period to really wrestle with this question, because I was a professional musician and I was going to have to step away from that work. And it was, to be honest, work that I enjoyed.
Right.
I liked being on stage. To this day, I still like being on stage. So there were the two sides to the decision. Am I willing to give up something that is valuable to me? And for me, I realized that I was able to still enjoy music without making a salary from it. And that was a huge step for me at the time. And then the second half of the decision was, am I going to actually do medicine? And that's what I've been talking about. So long answer to your question, I was able to get the clinical experience starting with the EMT. But then once I was at Columbia University, that facilitated my ability to go shadow and spend time in clinics. And particularly at the time, I was interested in surgical practice. So I got to work at a research lab called Coach, where we provided videography services for surgeons up at Columbia. And so I was in the OR on almost a daily basis for quite some time. And so that got me sort of on the inside and exposure to what clinical medicine is.
Yeah, that is awesome. What a great story, and definitely got you that really intense and in-depth exposure that I see a lot of non-traditional applicants trying to get. I think probably you can agree that one thing admissions committees really want to see is that non-traditional applicants know that medicine is what they truly want, and applying to medical school is their next step, because a lot of them will be out of college for some time or switching careers. So that is something I totally agree with. And you definitely seem to do it on the right way, is get a lot of exposure and really be able to convince yourself, obviously, and admissions committees that you are ready to go to medical school. We get a lot of non-traditional applicants asking us questions, and I think some people are a little hesitant to present themselves as a non-traditional applicant to medical schools. Sometimes I see being a non-traditional applicant as an advantage. What do you think about that?
I mean, of course, I have a biased perspective, but I would think, especially, I think both in the application process and in the interview process, I would think of it as a real advantage in the sense that you've developed a richer perspective over time if you've decided to reflect upon your experiences and engage in a sort of way that any doctor should anyway. You've probably shown passion for a particular topic other than medicine. And I think a presumption we have that I think is not true is that, you have to have demonstrated something incredible in the biomedical field. And I don't think, at least my experience was that the admissions departments at the various medical schools were more interested in you showing commitment to something rather than something particularly biomedical. They want to, like you said, they want to make sure that you understand what you're getting into. So they want to know that you, in fact, love or think you will love clinical medicine and potentially research. But more, they want to see that when you do see something you're interested in, you show a stick-to-itness and a determination, which is a key quality they look for. So I think in terms of the application, having lived a couple extra years and used those years in interesting ways allows you to paint a richer narrative, which I think is an advantage. It also allows you in some basic way, and maybe this is a West Coast thing. In Silicon Valley, everyone talks about fail often, fail early. And I think it allows you to speak to failures and how much you learn from them. And I think that is something that is generally an interesting story. Your ability to say, here's a weakness, or here's something I failed at, and here's what I learned so that the next time around when I'm doing this, because you're just going to bump into something in medicine sooner or later where it's just hugely challenging for you. And I think every single physician, doctor, trainee that I've met has come up against that. And what makes them good is that they are able to look it in the eye, be honest about what that is, and then overcome it. So your application as a non-traditional applicant, I think this maybe offers you some initial insight into that. To balance that out, I have to say that there may be, in terms of the entire process of going through it, one thing about having a balanced perspective is that when I was 18 and I was practicing 10 hours a day on the violin, it never crossed my mind to think that there might be another thing I could do or wanted to do. And I think as you gain perspective, sometimes you're like, oh, this is painful and this is very basic. And I already know how to do so much stuff. So why, and I think you have to be willing to be humble and step back and say, hey, I may have been an expert in this field, but I'm not here. And so I just have to go, you have to still go through those same steps. And I think sometimes that can be a challenge, but I would have to say it's a worthwhile challenge to take on.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've worked with a lot of non-traditional applicants that they can really bring, as you said, those richer experiences to the table. And that just those different perspectives that you've gained since being outside of college, or maybe working in a job or getting an additional degree similar to what you did, you can really bring that to the table to admissions committees and use that as a physician. And obviously, we're not encouraging everybody to go out there and try to be a non-traditional applicant, but I think it should serve as encouragement to those that are outside of college or thinking about switching careers or something to that degree, that if you are interested in medicine, then definitely go and explore that interest and kind of see where it takes you. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. I think it's a really nice distinction. So I have to say some of my peers are folks that went straight through college, went right into medical, and they're phenomenal. I'm constantly in awe of their skill and their maturity, and they were ready. They had a life path that just directed them in that way, and they knew early on for whatever reason, and they're going to be phenomenal doctors, and they're going to grow as they go within the medical field. And the thing about medicine is that it's so broad that you can continue to explore other interests. So if you have an interest in ethics or the humanities, so many programs now offer the ability to pursue that in addition to your clinical practice and learning. So I think definitely not to say that the straight path is less worthy, but I think you make that beautiful distinction that it does offer you the ability to share your story and offer in an interesting way, even further along the line, as you're in your clinical years and you're actually engaging with patients and treating, having those various angles and ways in can be a really wonderful way to connect with people. So I think if you think of it that way, if you take the time to reflect on your life experiences and you've had more, that just offers more for you to share and engage with, both with admission committees and then as you progress through medicine.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely agree. And lastly, Dr. Robison, we'll wrap up here, but what advice do you have for the non-traditional applicant that's getting ready to submit their application to medical school? How should they go about presenting themselves to the admissions committee?
I would say, first of all, don't be apologetic. Really look at it with a keen eye at your experiences and use that to highlight the strengths and the things that you've learned along the way and show how that commitment that you brought to that, you're ready to change direction now and bring that same level of commitment and passion to medicine itself. And I think that would make for a very compelling argument for your value to the medical community.
Absolutely. That's great. Thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate your insight and just even using your own experience to really model what other non-traditional applicants can put forth in their application. Thank you so much. And for everyone listening, as I said, Dr. Robison is one of our new advisors. He's available to take on applicants this year. So please reach out to us if you want any help through your application. Please listen next week for our next podcast. Thank you, Dr. Robison.
Thank you, Renee.
Our mission is to inspire, encourage, and inform students as you journey through a rigorous and intricate process of achieving your dreams in medicine. Visit us at prospectivedoctor.com for more essential resources in your medical school journey.